My future mother-in-law slid a manila envelope across the white linen tablecloth and said, loud enough for 60 people to hear, "Sign this tonight, or don't bother showing up to the wedding." That was the night I discovered that the quietest person in any room is sometimes the most dangerous one, and I don't mean her. My name is Nora. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 4 years, I've worked as a senior paralegal at Whitmore & Associates, one of the most respected family law firms in the city. I know what a legally binding contract looks like. I know what duress means. I know what it looks like when someone designs a moment specifically to bypass your ability to think clearly. And I know that when someone hands you a 20-page document in front of 60 witnesses and tells you to sign it or lose the man you love, they are betting that your fear will outrun your training. That night, they were wrong. I met Daniel at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue 3 years ago. He was laughing at something his college roommate said, and when he turned around and caught me staring, he didn't look away. He just smiled, like getting caught looking was the best possible outcome. We talked for 4 hours that afternoon. By the time the sun went down, he had my number, and I had the strange, quiet certainty that something had shifted in a way I couldn't fully explain. I didn't say that to anyone. I just drove home and sat with it for a few days, turning it over the way you turn over something you found in a field, and aren't sure yet whether it's treasure or just a rock. We took our time. A full year of dating before he introduced me to his family. He gave me small warnings along the way you give someone a heads up about a trail before they start hiking it. His mother was precise, he said. His father was quiet. His grandmother was the warmest person he knew. He said it like he was apologizing for the first 2 and preparing me to appreciate the third. I told him I could handle it. I believed that completely at the time. The first dinner at their house, his mother spent the meal asking questions that were shaped like questions but functioned as assessments. She said, in the tone that means something specific and unkind, "And your family is in Ohio?" She said Ohio the way people say somewhere very far away and not quite worth the drive. His father refilled his wine glass twice before the main course and offered exactly 4 sentences to the conversation all evening. His grandmother, sitting at the far end of the table, met my eyes once and gave me the kind of slow, deliberate smile that means, "I see you, I know what's happening, and I want you to know that I'm sorry." I held on to that smile for a long time afterward. Over the following months, I learned to watch my future mother-in-law the way you watch a change in weather. She was never openly cruel. That would have been easier to name and address. She was precise. She paid attention to the exact amount of praise that would still leave a splinter. At a holiday party, standing close enough that I was clearly meant to overhear, she told a circle of her friends, "Daniel always wanted a woman with drive. Nora certainly has that." She said it with the tone of someone describing a flaw they've decided to tolerate. Drive, in her mouth, sounded like something that needed to be contained. She made comments about our timeline, about the neighborhood I lived in, about whether I'd considered a career change once we were married, something with fewer hours, she said, something more appropriate for the life Daniel's family led. I heard those suggestions for what they were, an ongoing campaign to make me smaller, more manageable, more like what she had decided a woman in her son's life should look like. I said nothing that would have made things worse. I brought good wine to every dinner. I learned that his grandmother's favorite flowers were yellow tulips, and I brought them without fail each time I visited, until eventually she started keeping a vase specifically near the front window. I was building something slowly and deliberately, and I believed that patience was its own kind of strategy. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in March, in the kitchen of my apartment, with a ring that had belonged to his great-aunt. It was small and imperfect, and exactly right. We cried, both of us, though he would deny his part in that for years. We called his grandmother first because he knew, without either of us saying so, that she had earned first place. She said finally, and I could hear decades of affection in that single word. His mother said, "Oh, how wonderful," and within 45 seconds was talking about venues. The engagement party was her idea. She offered to host it at their house, to invite their family and friends, to handle all of it. Daniel said it was a gesture of goodwill, an olive branch, a sign that things were softening. My best friend told me over coffee to be careful, that she had a feeling. I told her she was reading into things. I told her his mother was trying, and that it mattered to meet her halfway. My best friend looked at me the way she does when she knows she's right and also knows I'm not ready to hear it, and she changed the subject. I got dressed that evening in the blue dress Daniel had helped me pick at the department store 3 weeks earlier. He had sat in one of those little chairs outside the fitting rooms and said yes to the first one I tried on, which is the most endearing and useless shopping behavior I have ever witnessed. We drove to his parents' house together with the radio low, talking about nothing important, and I remember thinking how good it felt, that particular kind of ordinary. The front of the house was lit up. Cars lined both sides of the street. When we walked through the door, 60 people turned to look at us, and the room filled with the warm, bright noise of an assembled crowd. I saw his parents' neighbors, his mother's friends from her book club and her charity work, old family associates I recognized from other gatherings. I saw his grandmother near the fireplace in a pale green dress, smiling at me. And I saw my boss. She was standing near the back of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, speaking with a woman I didn't recognize. I stopped walking for half a second. She caught my eye across the room and gave me the same small, composed nod she gives me when I've done something right in case preparation. I had no idea why she was there. I hadn't said anything to her about the party. I hadn't invited her. I filed it away as something to figure out later and let Daniel pull me forward into the room. His mother greeted us at the entrance in a cream blazer, with the particular smile she reserves for rooms full of people she needs to impress. She kissed my cheek and told me I looked lovely, and I thanked her sincerely for organizing everything. I meant it. I was still trying to meet her halfway. The first hour was genuinely fine. His cousin told me an embarrassing story about Daniel at 17 that Daniel tried unsuccessfully to intercept. 3 different people told me they'd never seen him happier, and each time I watched Daniel's face when they said it, because the truth of a thing shows up in people's faces before they have time to manage it, and his face was unguarded and easy. His grandmother held my hand for a moment near the bookshelf and said softly, "You're going to be all right," and I thought it was the kind of thing warm older women say as a general blessing. I didn't understand it as a specific preparation until later. I had been standing with a group of his mother's friends, listening to a conversation about a restaurant renovation downtown, when the room shifted. It happened quietly. The music lowered. His father moved toward the center of the room with the deliberate, uncomfortable posture of someone who has been told exactly what to do and is concentrating on executing it. His mother appeared at the edge of my peripheral vision, holding something in her hand. His father cleared his throat. The room oriented toward him the way rooms do when they sense something official is about to happen. He began to speak about family, about legacy, about the deep responsibility of welcoming someone into a family of their standing. I felt the phrase "family of their standing" move through me like something cold. I kept my expression pleasant and still. I was very good, by that point, at keeping my expression pleasant and still. His mother stepped forward. She was holding a manila envelope. Her voice was measured and controlled, not raised, not harsh, just completely clear and completely deliberate in the way of someone who has rehearsed this. She said that before the wedding could move forward, there were matters that needed to be addressed. She said she was sure I would understand. She said that families like theirs had a responsibility to be thoughtful about who they welcomed into their circle. Then she walked across the room and placed the envelope on the table in front of me. She said, "We'd like you to sign this tonight. It's a prenuptial agreement. Our family attorneys drafted it this week." She paused for exactly the right amount of time. "Daniel has already seen it." I looked at Daniel. He was standing 6 feet away and he looked like someone had reached in and removed the floor from under him. He said, "Mom, we talked about this, you said you weren't," and his mother spoke over him without raising her voice or altering her expression in any way. She said she also wanted to be transparent, in front of the people who loved and supported their family, about certain concerns she had developed over the past several months regarding my intentions. The room was completely silent. She said she meant no offense. She said she was only trying to protect her son. She said she had looked into some things, she used that word carefully, looked into, and she had questions about the timeline of our relationship, about financial conversations I'd had with Daniel, about the fact that I had left a second part-time job shortly after we started dating, and had, on several occasions, allowed Daniel to cover certain expenses. She framed every piece of it with care. She never used a specific word for what she was implying. She didn't need to. The architecture of the implication was sufficient. I felt 60 sets of eyes on my face. I looked down at the envelope. 20 pages by the thickness, I estimated. Drafted in 1 week. Delivered in public. Designed to be signed tonight, in this room, with no time to read it, no time to think, no counsel present, except the attorneys who had written it on her behalf. I had seen this structure in my work. I had seen it used on people who were frightened and alone and loved someone enough to sign anything to protect that love. I knew exactly what it was. I reached for the envelope. I heard Daniel say my name. I heard someone near the fireplace take a step. I picked up the envelope and I held it in both hands, and I thought about 4 years of casework. I thought about every coercion tactic I had learned to identify. I thought about the specific afternoon, 2 years into my job, when I had correctly flagged a suppressed disclosure clause in a settlement agreement during a review meeting, and my boss had looked at me across the table and said, "Good. Don't ever let yourself stop being able to see that." I set the envelope back down. I said, "I'm not going to sign this tonight." His mother smiled, the particular smile of someone who has already decided they've won and is simply waiting for the other person to realize it. She said, "Nora, I think you should consider very carefully what you're choosing here." "I am considering it carefully," I said. "I've been a paralegal for 4 years. I've reviewed hundreds of contracts. A document handed to someone in a social setting, in front of an audience, with no time for independent legal review, signed under the explicit threat of losing a significant personal relationship that document would not hold up in any court, under any judge I've ever worked with." She said, "This is not a courtroom." "No," said a voice from the back of the room, "but I am a family law attorney." My boss set her glass down on the side table and walked toward us, and the room moved out of her way the way rooms move for people who have spent 30 years establishing exactly who they are. She was 61 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, and she had built her entire career on family law and estate litigation. She had the kind of authority that doesn't require a raised voice or a dramatic entrance. She simply crossed the room and the situation rearranged itself around her presence. She stopped beside me. She looked at the envelope. She looked at my future mother-in-law with the same expression she uses to evaluate documents she suspects are fraudulent, not hostile, just precisely attentive. She said, "May I?" She didn't wait for an answer. She opened the envelope and began to read, standing there in the center of that silent room, turning pages with the focused calm of someone who does this professionally and has stopped finding it remarkable. After several minutes, she set the pages down. She said, "This agreement requires Nora to forfeit any claim to assets acquired during the marriage in the event of divorce, including appreciation in Daniel's existing investment holdings. It includes a non-disparagement clause, broad enough that she could not legally discuss the terms of her own marriage with a licensed therapist without triggering financial penalties." She turned another page, and on page 17, there is a clause waiving her right to any portion of the family trust in the event of Daniel's death, the trust whose current administrator is she looked up you. No one in that room made a sound. My boss continued, "I've encountered this structure before. Generally, I see it when the administrator of a trust has reason to insulate that trust from scrutiny. I'm not making formal accusations tonight, but I will say that if a client asked me to review the management of a trust that was being protected with this particular level of legal architecture, I would want a full accounting before I allowed anything else to proceed." From near the fireplace, Daniel's grandmother said, very quietly, "I have been asking for that accounting for 2 years." The oxygen in the room changed. His mother began to say something about being insulted in her own home, about people overstepping, about how this was a private family matter. Her voice had lost its precise calibration. His father stood completely still and stared at a fixed point on the wall. Near the door, several guests had adopted the careful sideways posture of people who are calculating the politest way to leave. Daniel walked across the room and stood beside me. He didn't make a speech. He didn't say anything eloquent or prepared. He took my hand and he stood there, and that was the part that mattered. I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't fully known I'd been holding rigid. My boss handed the prenuptial agreement back to my future mother-in-law and said, "I'd recommend retaining independent counsel before moving forward with any of this. And I would strongly recommend commissioning a full and independent accounting of the trust." She paused. "Tonight." Then she looked at me and said, simply and quietly, "You're doing fine." The evening dissolved after that, the way things do when the pressure holding them together is suddenly removed. Guests said careful, abbreviated goodbyes. His grandmother stayed late and sat with my boss near the window, talking in low voices for a long time. His father disappeared into the back of the house. His mother sat at the kitchen table alone and looked at nothing. Daniel and I drove home mostly in silence. After a while, he said, "I didn't know all of that was in it. She told me it was standard. She said it was just protection." He was quiet for another mile. "I should have read it myself. I should have pushed back weeks ago. I should have done a lot of things differently." I said, "I know." He said, "Nora, I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry." I believed him. Not because I needed to make myself believe it, but because I had spent enough time around people who caused damage intentionally to recognize someone who had been maneuvered and hadn't fully seen it happening. His mother had been managing him the same way she had been managing everything else, gradually, quietly, under the cover of love and family and obligation. He had been inside it too long to see the shape of it clearly. Some of us need someone to walk across a room before we can see what's been in front of us. What followed wasn't simple. The weeks after that night were hard in the specific way that necessary things are hard. Not pointless, but not comfortable. My boss connected Daniel's grandmother with an independent estate attorney who requested a formal accounting of the trust. What the accounting revealed wasn't anything that would result in criminal charges, but it was significant. A pattern of decisions over several years that had redirected trust funds in ways that were difficult to justify and impossible to ignore. There were meetings with attorneys. There was a formal restructuring of the trust's administration. His grandmother was restored to a more active role in its management. His mother and I have not spoken since that evening, not in any real way. I made my peace with that on the drive home that night, before I had even fully articulated it to myself. Some relationships break along their own fault lines, and the most honest thing you can do is stop trying to hold them together with effort they were never going to return. His grandmother and I talk every Sunday. She told me, months after everything had settled, that she had suspected something was wrong with the trust for a long time, but hadn't known how to move without proof, without someone she trusted in the right position at the right moment. She had watched her daughter-in-law slowly consolidate control over the family's finances and her son's decisions for years, and she had felt trapped in the particular way that family silence traps people gradually, through the accumulated weight of unspoken things, until everyone inside it is carrying too much to move. She told me she had called my boss 6 weeks before the engagement party. She had explained what she feared was being planned. She had asked if she would be willing to come and simply be present, as a guest, as a witness. She hadn't known exactly what would happen. She had known that having the right person in the room changes what's possible. I asked her how she knew my boss would be enough. She said, "I didn't know. I just know that you can't always give someone a better outcome. Sometimes you can only give them better company and trust them with the rest." Daniel and I got married 6 months later in a small ceremony with 12 people present. My best friend stood next to me and cried through the vows, which she had categorically promised she would not do and which I will love her for forever. His grandmother wore yellow because, she said, yellow was for days when something genuinely good was happening and you wanted your body to remember that you noticed. My boss came, brought an excellent bottle of wine, and left before the cake, which is entirely consistent with everything I know about her character. I think about that night regularly, not with anger, though the anger was real and earned, and I don't regret a single minute of having felt it. I think about what my future mother-in-law understood about rooms full of people. She had chosen that setting deliberately. She wanted the weight of an audience. She wanted 60 witnesses to do the work she couldn't do alone, to make the social cost of refusal so steep that I would sign without reading, and the contract would be real, and I would spend my marriage bound by terms I never had a fair chance to understand. What she hadn't accounted for was that rooms are reciprocal. The same witnesses she had assembled to watch me comply watched something else instead. They watched a woman pick up a document and say no. They watched another woman use 3 decades of expertise to dismantle an ambush in real time. They watched a grandmother claim, quietly and publicly, that she had questions, and everyone in that room understood immediately what those questions meant, and for whom. I think about this in my work now. I sit across tables from people who were handed documents in moments carefully engineered to minimize their ability to think. I watch people sign things they should not have signed because the room was designed to make refusal feel impossible, too public, too high stakes, too visible. And I think about my boss setting down her glass and walking across that floor, and I think, this is what it looks like when someone uses what they know exactly when it matters most. You won't always have the right person standing next to you. You won't always have years of training and a mentor and a grandmother who made one strategic phone call, but you can learn to recognize the shape of a moment that was built to trap you. You can learn that urgency is almost always a tactic. You can learn that anyone who needs your signature in public, tonight, before you've had a chance to read what you're agreeing to and consult someone who is working in your interest, that person is not offering you something fair. That person is offering you something timed. You can learn to put the envelope back down. My best friend asked me, after everything had settled, whether I was still angry at Daniel for not stopping it before it started. I thought about it honestly, the way she always makes me think about things. The answer was yes, for a while, and then it wasn't anymore. Because I watched him figure out, in a room full of 60 people, with his mother watching and his father silent, and years of conditioning pressing down on every decision he'd ever made, I watched him figure out what the right thing was, and he did it. Not dramatically, not with a speech. He walked across the room and he stood next to me and he held my hand and he stayed there. That cost him something real. His relationship with his mother has not recovered, and I don't believe it will. He chose me anyway, not in the grand and effortless way that love looks in the version of things we tell each other, but in the specific, weighted way that matters. He stood there when standing there was hard. I have given that the full amount of credit it deserves. His grandmother told me something the last time I visited, over tea in her sunroom with yellow tulips on the table between us. She said there are people who love carefully because they learned early that love comes with conditions, and people who love recklessly because no one ever showed them the cost, and then there are people who saw the price clearly and chose to pay it anyway. She said the last kind is the rarest kind. I looked at my husband, visible through the window in the backyard with his sleeves rolled up, doing something unnecessarily ambitious with the garden. She smiled. I know, she said. I can see it too. I don't tell this story to make anyone a villain, though the facts are what they are, and I'll trust you to draw whatever conclusions they earn. I tell it because I spent years in that family, believing that the only way to survive certain rooms was to make myself quieter, smaller, easier to absorb. I learned a version of patience that was really just a form of disappearing, slowly and politely, in whatever direction was most convenient for everyone around me. And then someone slid an envelope across a table and told me I had to decide right now, in front of everyone, with no time to think. And I picked it up. And I put it down. And I said, not tonight. That felt like the truest thing I had said in years. Like something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment to come through. I've been trying to keep saying things that true ever since.